Wow.
Yeah.
So like as I was saying, we started. I don't have a strong agenda for this one like I did the last time around. I didn't prepare any slides, but I thought it would be valuable to sort of get together and just talk generally about sort of resume standards and make it more of a discussion. Like the way I sort of described it, it's funny. Like a lot of the things you'll talk about in a brown bag, machine learning, Elm, MVU, these kind of topics they're just fact based. You can do a lecture on it and sort of be covering your basis, but there's still a lot of debate, I think, in the resume ideal. And recruiting is not a science. I don't want to call it an art, but it's not a science. And so just worth sort of covering a couple of the basics and having a chat about them. We've had a couple of chats in the Slack about this here and there, things about like, should there or should there not be a summary? What should be first and foremost when you construct your resume? What are the most important things to have on there? Should you have things like hobbies and interests? And so I just wanted to maybe just be a space to throw it to the floor and kick off a conversation, Q&A. I mean, I'm trying to see exactly who's here versus, seniors versus junior. I might be the only senior here. Interesting.
Are you a super senior or just a senior?
Well, you'll get my opinion, but.
I think it's also helpful to mention that you do hiring too, right?
Yes,
so
I do.
You know what you look for in a resume, and what can be really valuable. So.
Yeah, I mean, these days I mostly hire too. So it's pretty much been my life for the last 5-6 years.
Do you feel, so I used to teach resume and cover letter writing, but it was to mostly non-tech people. And I think that tech has a very different take on what is acceptable in a resume or a cover letter.
Yep.
So in general, I would always advise students not to do a summary because it wasn't useful and it was like frowned upon. But I see a lot of people using a summary, and I wonder, one, if you think that's helpful, and two, what are some pointers if you do think you should include a summary? Because I also think that you don't want to say like, hey, I'm just looking for a place that's going to mentor me, because although that might be important, that might be a red flag in some companies' eyes.
It could be, yeah. So, I mean, this is actually one of the areas where I think there's a lot of differentiation from hiring manager to hiring manager. I can say for myself, and I say this almost embarrassingly, but I don't read them. I don't read the summaries. I always go right to the bullets. I want to see what skills are being called out and sort of how they've been applied. So the summary is a little bit lost on me. I will say though that it doesn't hurt either. I'm just going to pass over it for the most part. And I think anybody who doesn't read them will similarly just pass over them. So they're not going to harm you. For the people who will read them, and I actually might be worth saying that, doubling back a little bit on that, the first pass through the resume is when I'm looking for just sort of quick hits. So they hit all the right markers that I want to have a screen conversation with this person. If they've passed that initial screen, I might go back and read everything in much more detail, like before the call. I'm like, okay, I'm ready to talk to this person, so I should make sure that I know everything they told me. And so I'll go over similar story actually with cover letters. I frequently will not read cover letters, but I might go back and read it just to see what was said when I've made a decision to sort of talk to them and have that initial 30-minute screen. If you're going to keep the summary on there, the biggest thing I would say is make it really skills focused. It shouldn't really be aspirational. I don't think I wouldn't bother with things like I want to be mentored or I want to grow my career. I mean, those are givens. And I think that as you said, there's potential risk there as well. I would focus it on, here's who I am, here's what I do, here's what I'd like to do, and be very sort of skills and almost job focused.
Thanks.
Other questions? Oh, okay, cool.
I also add a little bit. I mean, I think from a different perspective, I do hiring sometimes, and I have done a little bit more in the past. I like summaries, but I think it's like what you said. Like, I'm not. If you have one or you don't have one, that's whatever. But if you do have one, I would just say like, don't be too generic about it. Like if it's a summary and you're just like you whatever seeking, it's like if you're saying the same thing everyone's saying, it's like, okay, well then you probably didn't need to say this. But I think ultimately with resumes, at least my perspective is like, everything here should be making me stand out as a candidate. And if you have
Yes.
something that you're really passionate about or interested about, and like you put it on the resume, and like, you know, if I see that, that I don't know, sometimes someone will have a particular phrase or ideology that strikes me. I'm like, okay, I like what this person's saying. I like their idea. And that could be, you know, because at the end of the day, if I have 4 or 5 people, especially when it's junior positions where everyone's pretty much coming in with the same skill set,
Yeah.
that's a space where what seems like your personality or wheel or drive or particular goals can make you stand out. So I'll just say that if you're not going to do one, it's fine. But if you do one, you know, just don't like copy paste it. Actually think like, okay, what part of myself do I really want to put out there that I think is unique and interesting?
I would agree. In fact, you hit on something that I think is just worth saying as a broad element. It's always worth thinking of when you're submitting a resume to anyone. Ultimately, think of it almost like an audition tape. Like the whole basis isn't really just to itemize your skills. It's to present a story that you want the person reading it to get, and get it quickly, and get it from page one. You don't want to be waiting 30 seconds or 60 seconds before you get to the really impactful moment in your little dialogue. It's got to be right up front and sort of make people sit up and listen. That's also why I like to personally lead with a skills section, because it's a short, focused, almost bulleted list of things that you know that they're going to be looking for anyway. Do you check the boxes for the role? And so don't make them guess, don't make them look, put it right in front of their face. Like, I have Python, I have AWS, I have the things that I know that you care about, that you can just say, okay, they check the boxes, now let's look into it and see how much experience they have. When did they use it? How did they use it? What projects are they working on? Hey, Gant.
I put something in the chat there. I don't know if you caught it, but I noticed there's a big difference between people that like to put their full resume on in like a PDF style versus just having kind of an overview of your skills. Personally, from my background, I feel like that's a lot of information to be putting out there on the World Wide Web, but maybe in a development standpoint, it makes more sense. I don't know, but yeah, I feel like a review, an overview of your skills versus a full downloadable copy of a resume is kind of more apt. I don't know. What's your opinion on that?
I mean, I can say that, like, right now, if you go to my website, there's a full resume up there. The danger, of course, is that I have to now keep it up to date, and I never do. It probably doesn't matter as much anymore as it would have 10 years ago, but so that applies. Like, if you're going to have a presented copy of it, make sure it's always fresh and make sure it's indexed, and, you know, because people will stumble on it. And especially, like, as a hiring manager, I will find it. I will, you know, frequently when I'm looking at candidates, one of the first things I'll do is go to their website, go to their GitHub, go to LinkedIn, and like look at things off the resume, which is coincidental because it'll, like I said, it'll circle back to that, but make sure that the information is sort of consistent in sources. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with it. I do think the chances that somebody will stumble on it and thereby reach out to you is low. So I don't think it's critical that you have a web version of yourself, but I don't think there's a lot of harm in it either.
I would say in terms of that, just keep super critical information like your address, you know, maybe your phone number off of your resume. Like, my contact information on my resume is really my email and LinkedIn, because obviously LinkedIn is a contact, is a way of messaging me. And that's really it. And it allows me to, like, if, you know, I don't have it posted online in like a public way as you're describing, but if I did, then at the very least, the LinkedIn and the email would be a way of filtering out unwanted messages. So, you know, and then, yeah, they're going to know your work history, but if you have a LinkedIn, they're also going to know your work history there, you know. And so, like, any proprietary like any information that, like, I guess just keep any information that you wouldn't want to be public off of the resume that is publicly available. And I'm not sure if you really need that kind of information on there in the first place. I mean, like, you may not even be able to talk about the projects in depth that, like, oh, it's like some secret project that your company was working on, and you have some NDA. Maybe you can describe what you did, but you can't talk about the project. You won't be able to put it on your resume anyway. So I think it's okay, as long as you're just making sure. Some people put their address, like, that's why I was mentioning it, and their phone number. So as long as you just make sure not to do that, and but have some way of contacting you that is okay for you to, like, okay, this message doesn't matter and I can ignore it. I think that's fine.
I put my city and my state on my resume, only pretty much for like situations where someone's looking for a remote employee to like overlap at a certain time zone and things like that. Just basically be upfront that, like, here's where I am. Here's where I'm going to operate out of. This will be my time zone. That's pretty much it. I do have my phone number. It's always felt weird, but I've always it works more for some recruiters and not some recruiters, locally here for like the tech scene locally in my state. Phone numbers, like they're not going to email you. Like, if they don't have a phone number, like, they'll just pass you over, which is insane. So it's on there, but I hate that it's on there because, like, I get so much crap on my phone. It's just not ridiculous, but I like the phone number, so I don't want to have to remember another one.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess a way to yeah.
I mean, I put phone number on the resume, phone number, email, and an address. If it's just like an online platform, I just keep it strictly email. That's sort of what I've always done. I know they used to give the advice of, like, Google yourself and, like, see what comes up and yada yada, and try and whatever. I don't know if that really applies to everyone. But I think right now, like, what was I going to say? I think I posted in the chat. LinkedIn has just been if you want to put up everything, it lets you put up everything there, and it's not in an unexpected way, and everything's got its sections, and it's fine. And then actual resumes to individual companies, I curate, because people, if someone's reading your resume, they don't really care about stuff that isn't related to the position that they're looking for, unless you have a way to spin it, so you don't want to give them the full thing. Put that on LinkedIn. LinkedIn, it's great. Like, it all looks good, all your history, all your experience, it looks great up there. And then when you're actually going for somewhere, you take that, you trim it all down, and then here is everything about my life that is relevant to this, and I guess there's some finesse in taking stuff that isn't obviously relevant and making it relevant if you feel like you don't have enough experience from, the field that you're in.
Yep.
I have a question. Sorry, I think my name is Francisco right now because my son just used Zoom.
Hey.
So I'm Vanessa.
Call it a nickname.
So I'm a self-taught, and I'm learning, so I have no experience, although I work for more than 10 years in other fields like social work and education. I've been reading a lot about how to build the curriculums, and like you said, some people have opinion like you should put all the experience and phrases like you can transfer skills that you can transfer for the job that you're applying. But in my case, for instance, in terms of experience, if I'm applying for a web developer job, should I just put like the projects that I've been doing by myself? Because in terms of, or should I put as well that I have this other experience, like in terms of work?
I mean, I think it's fine to put other. So I mean, other technical experience. So if you have like other technical experience and you're applying for sort of a different pivot in tech. So if you like have back end experience and you're looking at like a front end React role or something, that's definitely fine. I think that's just something clean. If it's non-technical work experience, I'd be wary of including it if it takes up your entire block of the work experience section. I think it would be better to highlight projects or the things that, especially in more, in fact, more than especially, I'd say only if there's a way to view some public element to it, reviewing the code like on GitHub or having some remnant of the project living still publicly, like a website you can look at.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And now I'm trying to build like that, because before I was putting all the work experience, but it didn't make sense because it's like, okay, this is my experience, obviously, but not in the job that I applying to. So
well, the soft skills need to come in. So you said you did education, right?
yeah.
How many years?
3 years.
Yeah. So experience in educating and teaching others for X number of years. And whatever other certifications from that field are usually pretty good too. Like if you're worked in medical and you go to HIPAA compliance and you put that on there, like software people who work in medical love seeing that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
True. Yep.
Thank you.
I guess that's also an interesting strategy, right? If you're coming from a particular field, if you see software companies whose work or history of work has been in those fields, and all of a sudden your prior experience becomes more relevant, right?
Yes.
So that can also be like a nice strategy. If you worked in education, then ed tech is something where you have like key insights, because you now can say like, oh, well, I've been on both sides of the spectrum as a developer, but also as a client. So that can also look really good.
I would almost say, oh, go ahead.
It would even pump you up, I think, quite a bit more than you might realize. Like,
yeah,
it's unusual to get that kind of cross experience. Like if I'm, I'm in the fintech world. When I'm hiring engineers, I actually kind of rarely come across fintech engineers. I'll often bump into just engineers out of standard consumer spaces or quant engineers, which is sort of a different world. And so if somebody came in that was like, I was a former analyst and then I became an engineer and now I can do both, that would be hugely attractive. And so it probably can bump you up quite a bit.
Right.
and by that degree, I know people think that it's silly to modify their resumes, but I think it's very intelligent, especially if you have something, if in a job posting, you have something you can adjust just ever so slightly to be, because I think keeping it to one page is kind of important, but what's on that one page should change if you can.
Yeah.
I'd agree. I mean, it's sort of funny. Like I'm not a big stickler on the one page thing, but I agree though in principle that make sure that the first page, if it is more than one page, make sure the first page is the most important things. Second, third pages should be for if we've piqued my interest and I'm like, well, let's see what else they did. And I want to dig, then that's fine. But you got to make sure that if you don't hit my interest on the first page, I probably won't go to 2.
Like the Google search,
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
not in the top 10.
Yep, you missed it.
I see Sarah was asking in the chat about
I never check the chat.
open source. I check the chat. She was asking, like, what if you have open source contributions? So I guess I think open source is really good. The only thing I'm worried about is, let's say you've contributed like maybe like one commit to some open source thing, then you say you've worked on it, and not everything translates into a PR or a Git commit. So you just have to kind of like be wary about that. You could have done a ton of work with a particular organization, but it doesn't translate into, little green checks. And I feel like we probably have to sort of make it clear on the resume that this was not my contributions directly as a submitting code, but some other way. But I think it's good. Open source is good.
I would agree too. And I mean, you can even describe what you've done, like treat it like a job listing, like you've worked on project X and bullet list the things you did on the project, even if there aren't commits or PRs you can point to. If there are, that would be awesome. But if there aren't, you can at least itemize the things you did do if you worked like as part of a team or a group. on something, and you know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that you absolutely have to commit code to have said that you worked on an open source project. Like, if there's a community and there were community events that you assisted with, you can say that. That doesn't go in a commit at all. And I mean, I think it goes in terms of the resume. What is the resume supposed to do? The resume is supposed to get people interested in calling you. You know what I mean? So,
Right.
like, I think it's like I did work for open source. I think that's valuable regardless of what the work is, you know. So with that, they're just like, okay, yeah, so yeah, that's
Totally agreed.
Cameron raises a really good question. When reviewing an applicant, how much do you care about the design of the resume?
Personally, none at all. As long as it doesn't get in my way. As long as like the design
Like no bullet
doesn't,
points.
yeah, like yeah. As long as like I don't get lost in the resume and I can't like not find things.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, like, as long as it just passes a certain baseline.
What's that?
Like, sorry, as long as it just passes like the certain baseline that you can read
Yeah,
it.
as long as it looks acceptable. Like, you know, like it doesn't look silly or anything. Like, other than that, that's kind of like, and I'd say the one caveat to this though is if I'm hiring a designer or a UX specialist, yeah, then show me a little something. But even then, I don't think it's got to be crazy.
What about front-end engineers? Would that be like the same kind of criteria?
Depends what you mean by front end. Not every front end engineer has to have design chops, but if you're looking to be like the front end, or if you're going to be a UX specialist and actually work in the design elements of things, then yeah, I think it sort of falls in the same category of like make it look okay.
So readability, 100 is a top priority, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, Gant makes a good point. Like sometimes it'd be foolish not to think that there isn't some unconscious reaction I might have if something looks really wrong. Like my brain might want to go, well, focus on the data, but it's, you know, we're human. So if things are formatted funny or all over the place, I might kind of be like, all right.
Yeah, I think more is also very relevant for resume design, like readable, legible, and then afterwards, if you want to put a little flair. But yeah, if you're not a designer and it's, I don't know, some people, you can never know the person who's looking at it, like their gauge for how much they want of that stuff. It's like, when I was in traditional engineering, they always told us, you know, the best thing you can do for how you smell is just like soap, because you don't know how people react to certain scents and like fancy perfumes. Like just be clean, just soap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Neutral. Go neutral. Right down the middle.
One of the things I'll say is it's kind of like a business card in a way. And the same things that make business cards more attractive. So having a crazy business card is going to get you crazy contracts, but there are certain quality indicators you can do for business cards, and you can apply all of those over to your resume.
I like it. Yeah, definitely. What else we got? Now I'm paying attention to chat like I wasn't earlier. Karen, about the self-taught skills, I would say it's fine to include them, but just include them in the skills section. Don't be overly flowery about it. Just because like it can, not everything in the skills section has to have an explicit call out in experience or in a project. So if you have something that you know you can do, but you don't have experience for it, just throw it up in there. And then if you get asked during the interview process, then you can at least just elaborate. Like, I'm self-taught, I've worked on these projects on my own, X, Y, and Z. You can sort of talk through it.
So that actually brings up an interesting question. How do you associate the skills that you either learned on the job? Like, so you have the skills section, and, you know, as you said, you want to put the skill section at the top, because at the very least, it sets the mood for the rest of your resume. Like, how do you associate the skills that you used on the job? Or how do you, I guess, say, okay, I have these skills and this is the evidence? You know, is it while you're writing each bullet point, you literally list the skill out? Or like, I guess I list the skills in the project or something?
So this is just a personal preference thing, but actually the way I do that is I bold references to the skills in my experience section. as just visual cues, like something, oh, this is in 2 jobs ago, this was 3 jobs ago, and just sort of give you sort of quick jump points. But I don't think that's necessary, but I've just done it because when I see it myself, it's sort of my eyes jump to those points, and it sort of almost acts as a quick reference across somebody's resume.
Mm-hmm.
Especially because, I mean, a lot of resumes are verbose, and so, you know, I like to think that I'm giving everything the time of day and reading it appropriately, but really, I'm, you know, if you get 50 of these, you're reading them fast, and you're sort of trying to get nuggets as quick as you can. And so anything you can do to draw the eye where you want the eye is, I think, worth doing.
Would you include personal projects as experience for anyone who, like me, changing careers to front-end development?
Yes, but make sure that there is an artifact of it in the world. Like, have a GitHub repo for it, have a public web page for it. Like, I wouldn't list a project that is just like, hey, I did this thing, and then have no sort of like reference point. Ultimately, almost anything you put on the resume, if I'm curious enough to want to talk to you, right before that, I'll be looking some of this stuff up. I'll look up the company you worked for, I'll look up the projects you worked on, and just try to get a little bit more of info. So if it's, just make some public presence of it, especially if it's truly personal and you can, that's the perfect thing to like host on GitHub, just as a showcase. Like, here's an example of my coding work.
I asked about this a few months ago, and you guys gave some good advice. But I had like a web development internship like a year ago, and then so I fully rebuilt the website like from scratch. So obviously I called it out on my resume, but then they replaced the website I built with like a worse version from WordPress, which like also is this is another story, but it's completely like inaccessible and just loads slowly, and it's not very good. So I needed a way to like call that out on my resume. Like, I fully rebuilt this website, not the current version. Please don't go look.
Yeah, that's always a little weird. I think the way I remember that, and I think the way you handled it was fine. It should just be like, you know, describe what you built and then sort of add an addendum, like since dropped or deprecated or something. I mean, I'm sure anyone's like, yeah, I'm sure like you can relate to this. Like, there are whole companies I worked for that don't exist anymore. And so sometimes it can be weird when you've been in the industry for a while, things start to look funky on the resume as you go back. So you get used to that kind of language. Like, well, I did this and then they got acquired and that acquirer got acquired. You never heard of them. So just try Googling it and see what comes up.
I guess again with well, not again, but I guess to Cameron's point, I wanted to ask this question. I'm in a similar situation where I worked with a company and I worked on a public-facing site, and I actually had the advice of, I used to have the site on my resume, like a link to the site, and it's changed obviously since I left. But one of the things that the person told me is that the website isn't very accessible, and there were some issues with viewing it in a mobile browser, and so he had suggested that I remove it, which I ended up doing. But since the conversation is going on, I kind of wanted to get your opinion on that. Like, how would I talk about what I did, you know, even though the site is still changing?
Yeah. I guess my opinion is I wouldn't link to it if it's been changed into like it, because there's not a lot of value in convincing them to click and look at something if it's A, not what you built, and B, not better. But I think you can describe it fine, and then in the process of the description, then you can sort of explain that this project was 3 years ago, it's different now, this, you know, but this is what I built, this is what I did while I was on it. Because the fact that it is a company or a project that still exists is in and of itself an interesting data point, but it doesn't mean that you have to have been contributing to it up until today. So,
Right.
yeah. So what else in the chat? Oh, that is actually a good point. I used to do that. Yeah, so it's not a bad idea to keep snapshots of things, even just as reference points, especially if you're front end focused. So if you want to show off something you built, you know, take a couple of snaps or take a quick video of it in motion. It's not a bad idea.
I guess continuing on the same conversation, like, so One of the things that with the project that I had recently stopped working on, I built the nav bar for it. I'm pretty proud of it. It was like one of my first React components that I built, you know, and I eventually kind of took ownership of it. So like anything that needed to be changed in the nav bar, you know,
Nice.
was mine. Was my thing. How do I describe that? Like, I feel like I built a nav bar for a website. It's kind of, you know, not.
No, that's a thing. I mean, it's a React component. I assume you could sort of walk. I mean, anything in a resume is going to be bullet-y, so you're not going to describe it in detail, but you can say built a replacement nav bar using React and X, Y, and Z. You know, had to be mobile compliant. You know, like you just sort of like quick bullet hit the key points of why you did it and what you were proud of about it. Yeah.
I want to throw in there, we have a trick at Infinite Red that we do. Our contract lets us anything that we build that can be open source, we're allowed to do. It's just a small clause in our contract. So what we do is when you have something that's so greatly a component that you can abstract away, if you created it as an open source library and then put that into the client's project, you know, basically you still deliver it, but then at the end of it, you have this open source thing, which we can use for another client, and it kind of sits on our wall as a sort of badge of something that we've made and can maintain.
That's excellent.
So it's a really awesome thing that we get to do. Not enough of our devs do it, but if you can get that to an open source, then you just click one of the last things we talked about, and you have something that's forever yours. It's pretty awesome.
That's pretty cool. I like that. Not a lot of companies would allow that. That's pretty neat. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would consider that like a huge benefit if a hiring manager told me that.
A lot of places don't mind because I mean they want their product, and if we do it, we do it in open source, or we put it straight in there. Their product is like unique, but one React component off to the side.
Oh, sure.
It's fun.
That's very cool. I like that. Cool. Any other questions, thoughts? I mean, I'll also throw this out there. One of the things I like to see that I think not everybody does, so it's worth a bit of discussion, is I like seeing hobbies on a resume. I think that's page 2 material. Don't make that up front and center. But if I've been piqued about somebody and I'm ready to like initiate a screen, it is nice to know what makes them rounded. And this is also not saying I'll never disqualify somebody for not having hobbies ever. Like I don't care that you shared, but if you do have something interesting, it's always, I think, fun as a hiring manager to see roughly what kind of person is this, you know, what do they like to do, what are their passions? And so I think it can add a little extra to a resume.
So that brings up a very, very interesting question. So I at some point I would like to work for Twitch because I've been playing video games for a long time, and I've been a part of, at the very least, the fighting game part of esports for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
That is not reflected in my resume at all. Like, I'm an 11-year veteran of the fighting game community, but again, that's not reflected in my resume. And like, I say this whereas Twitch is a very particular brand that I would like to say, hey, you know, I have experience in at the very least as a competitor, you know, as a I guess a Patreon, you know, going to these events. How would you describe that on your resume? Like, I know just thinking out loud, my first thought is putting it in the summary, but how would you say, hey, you know, this has been something I'm passionate about, you know, I've been doing this for a decade at least, you know, I've been doing this for a significant amount of time. I feel like I can bring this value to your organization. How would you do that in those like particular cases, you know, where you don't have experience to kind of back it up in a sense?
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of two things in there. The first is that this is just a general long-term personal passion of yours that I think might always warrant a small bullet, like at the very end of your resume in like a hobby section, and keep it short, keep it concise, but sort of highlight what you're doing. But you're also describing targeting a little bit. And I think I would take a different approach if you were applying to Twitch and you were like, I'm applying to a role at a company that I'm passionate about. Then yeah, it probably does belong in a summary view. I'd struggle, I think, to immediately come up with a good way to describe that, but that's something that, like, you know, I've never worked in the gaming space, so I don't have a direct comparison. But if, you know, if I'm hiring and I see very clear and vivid passion for my company or my industry, that is in and of itself a solid data point. Like, you know, if I'm evaluating people on different metrics and I have a couple people on the similar plane, I'll index for passion over non, you know, if that makes sense. I mean,
Right.
So yeah, I can't think of a specific way to do it, but if you were applying to Twitch, I would highlight that more than just throwing it in the hobby section.
I see.
Brian, sorry. When you say like hobbies, because I've been reading as well, like, and I remember reading an article that said like, if your hobbies are like the most common ones, like reading, photography, don't put it because it's almost like a template. You're saying like if you have an interesting that one that you can bring something to the job that you're applying, or just
No, ironically, I would include
I jump in for a moment. I
yeah,
actually have a really good. So I have hobbies, or I call them personal interests. My resume, and the section, you know, shrinks and narrows because like it's 2 pages, and really, I would like the second page to be full. So it's like I fill it or shrink it as, you know, I need to, like, you know, just take up the space. But I have a section called what I'm reading, what I'm working on, and what I'm listening to. And I outline like the 3 books that I'm reading, so somebody can see, what are you reading? Like, what's the type of, you know, literature that you're looking at? And obviously, you know, I'm not picking the worst book that I might be currently reading right now, but you know, it is what I'm reading, what I'm working on. So like I have like my first raised bed garden, learning how to bake bread, still failing, and then like doing home remodels. So I mean, it shows that like I have a really diverse interest set, but then I also have like the music that I'm listening to. And it's just 3 things that I am really passionate about that are my hobbies. Fills a space on my resume, but it just kind of extends the resume of who I am a little bit more. So, and my goal for doing that and being very specific was, I hope somebody remembers. I hope the fact that,
yeah,
I have here the first Witcher book on here. Like somebody goes, oh yeah, she's you know, reading the Witcher series. Like that's how I stick in someone's head. It's not just reading; it's specific.
I like that. I've been like reading and seeing other like portfolios and CV resumes online, and I remember like seeing some of them like they are like that, like, oh, you want to know more about me, or this is the books I'm reading, or this is the series I'm watching, and it tells so much more about the person than just the hobbies. Specifically saying, oh, I like read, taking photos or whatever. I really like that.
Yeah.
And for photography, I would, you know, if you included that as a personal interest and you had an online portfolio, I would maybe link to it. I mean, if it were me, just because if it's something you're proud of, like it's an extension of you. It lets someone see you in a different space. And I think now whenever, and I'm going to use the term culture fit, but that's like good in some places, bad in some places. But when someone's trying to just determine like, are you a good person? Would you fit here? You know, just anything about you to help them make a decision. It can show them a little bit more about you. Like, do you have a really good attention to detail? Because you like macro photography and micro photography. Like you're really interested in a very specific niche and you're doing it well. You know, what does the website there look like? You know, how do you have things laid out? Do you have them curated? You know, what type of information about each photo do you list? Like specifically, like the settings that you use. It's just extra information that goes above and beyond that shows tangential skills that are relevant whether you realize it or not.
I like the way you worded that too. It's like I sort of always joke that like ultimately a recruiting process is really evaluating two things, and they're kind of separate things. It's can you do the job at all? That's sort of like the baseline. But then there's also the how will you do the job, which is really what I spend the lion's share of my energy on when I'm recruiting. For the most part, if you've done any work in the skill sets that I need for the job, I'll soft check that box, and then we'll do some technical screening questions and maybe some coding just to show that you can do some work. Beyond that, mostly what I'm looking for is, are you passionate? Are you creative? Are you hardworking? Like I'm looking for those softer skills, and those kinds of things do somewhat highlight that. Like when you do something even off the books, it's something you commit to, you're dedicated to, you're demonstrating passion and curiosity. Those things do matter.
I think as a person, especially if the person look at your resume also has a technical role, like they will be working with you. Like Bryan said, like a big question is just like, do I want to work with this person? If like I need the resume to show competence because I want to work with somebody competent, but all the stuff that like Sarah talked about are things that make me think, oh, it might be really fun to work with this person. And I think I feel like there's so much leeway I can have in how technical someone is when they come in sometimes, but like if I just don't want to work with you, you could be the best programmer on earth. I don't, and it's not going to happen, right? Which is I guess the whole point of the final interview, just to determine like if you leave that interview just like I do not want to work with this person. That's it.
I don't remember who I was talking to. Somebody in this group I was talking to about how I'm one of my most thankful dying myths is the 10x engineer asshole, which is something that has persisted for so long that I'm just glad it's starting to wither away a little bit. That I would rather have a team of passionate, committed, creative, kind mid-tiers than any super senior jerk that's going to be difficult to work with, difficult to manage. Like that's just not what you want in the office. So
10x team, not 10x individual.
That was you. That's right.
It was. It's so great to hear my words coming back to me. It's just like, oh, nice.
That's right.
So humble.
My thing with that is just always like, it's just not real. It's like, okay, great. This person writes code faster than everyone else, but we had to like break our backs to have the entire organization work around their, complete offensiveness. And it just never, they're just never like as good as people think they are. It's just like an excuse after the fact to justify why this person exists.
I mean, even if you look at it from a systems perspective, if this person is the best engineer, like leagues above everybody else, when that person eventually goes because time claims us all, like now you have a giant gap in your organization, and maybe even then, like that person to even get that person to stay, not get that person to stay. That person's like such a big jerk, like you have to you had to build so many barriers around to just be able to work with that person. Now the person's gone, and it's like now you have to literally dismantle this entire thing that you built around this person. It's just the cost is just not worth it.
Agreed.
Recently, when doing evaluations, I have just been like, over my career, I just more and more prioritize process people than necessarily, like Chad said. Like we recently had this issue where we had a person who was lauded as like the greatest engineer the company ever had, but like when they left, they didn't write anything down or tell anyone. So I'm like, are they the greatest? Like in the long run, did they like, what is the result of their existence here? And it might end up being more trouble than it was worth, as opposed to somebody who just told people what they did and how to do it again.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of skills which do not seem immediately impressive, and these are the types of things to put on a resume. These are the types of things that I look for. So like, if I don't need you to say like, I can do complex differential equations in MATLAB or whatever. But like if you say like, oh, well, I documented my entire company's whatever process, or I automated this thing, or I designed like workflows, I streamlined this process, I saved people money or time. These are things that are also sort of like tech stack independent that I think serious like technical hirers look out for, because that's the person who you rely on actually in the company. That's the person who will give you 5 years of good quality work versus like sort of one big boom.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm always the person that constantly says I have an interesting question, but you bring that up. And so one of the things that happened when I started working is I came into this company, I joined this team, and I was like, okay, what do I need to do to get ramped up? It's like, here's what our tech stack is. They just gave me a list, and here is a little bit of documentation. Here's the code, go. And I was just like, okay. And I found that I couldn't get anything done. And so what I eventually did, what I just decided to do was to write an onboarding process. At the very least for me, I just wrote the onboarding process. So like, and then eventually I realized that I couldn't be accountable for the things that I was doing. So I wrote a list of things to like, I think at the time why is every person, oh, this is my alarm. Anyways, what I ended up writing is like a list of things. I was using, I think, Linda at the time to learn stuff. And I was like, I just literally listed out the chapters, for the technologies that I needed to learn. And then during the stand-up, because I didn't really have anything to do with like, oh, this is how far I am in Linda, and so on and so forth. So my question is, does it even, because of what TK was saying, should I put that on my resume that I kind of onboarded myself? I kind of onboarded myself, and how do you describe that?
Yeah, I mean, craft it like a creation, not like an act. Like you created an onboarding process for this company. That's a thing. That's an important thing. That's a strong team skill.
Mm-hmm.
Anything to say, Sarah?
I'm just keeping mom. This is great.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily frame it as like I did it for me, but I did it for the company. Like
Right.
Bryan said, sounds really, really good. Ultimately, it was so that you could like function, but it says like this is a service that I can provide to an organization. That looks really good. I really like seeing somebody like solve real problems like that, or like real bottlenecks versus, I don't know, sort of like more esoteric things.
It's
and if
one
you
of
can
those
push it to
underappreciated.
GitHub, it's public. So I'm just saying, you'll
Exactly.
have public knowledge that you wrote the onboarding sections of their documentation. It'd be great. Yeah.
It's one of those underappreciated things about tech in general. Like for the most part, the kind of problems you're going to get in tech is like, I need you to build X, and I need it in 2 weeks. Have fun. And like, you're not going to get bulleted tasks very often of like, do this, then this, then this. So anything that showcases that creativity, that you encountered an awkward problem and you just solved it. And and then you passed on the knowledge up, and now it's part of that company's process. That shows a lot of initiative, shows creativity. I would consider that a big win.
And also organization. I think the solving the problem part, everybody kind of gets into that, but not many people are willing to go into, and then I set it up so that this became a system.
Yeah.
That systemization type thinking is very valuable.
And I mean, here it's sort of the funny thing too. Depending on what type of company you're going for, I mean, we've talked a lot of different ways, but my experience is in startups, so I'll focus on that. If you go into smaller companies, this is a consistent problem. You're talking about teams that might only have been in existence for a year, 2 years. Maybe there's 4 or 5 of them. They're doing their best, but they haven't built a system yet. They haven't built, I mean, they might have the bones of one. They work together, they have PRs, but like they haven't really ironed out what they're going to look like as they scale, hopefully, if they're successful and keep growing. And so that's a skill in and of itself that companies will want all on its own. it's a nice skill also for people who are angling into leadership roles, like tech lead, architect. They're sort of angling toward those pieces where they're going to take control of things more than just a piece of software. They also want to help the companies strategically. They want to help the company grow and scale, and so it's a good skill.
It's not a question, but just a thought. It's like Chad was describing things that he did in his previous job that he probably wouldn't think of it if it wasn't this meeting. What I'm saying is, like, sometimes people like in a job do stuff and they tend to oversell or just sell it, and other people tend to undersell, like, oh, I did this thing, but I didn't thought it was worth to put it on my CV. I don't
Always
know.
oversell.
Yeah, but that's it's not easy for everybody. I think. I don't know how people, like, do you talk to your colleagues, like, when you're rewriting your CVs? I don't know. I mean,
I literally talked to someone, and I had a problem with not selling myself enough because I just am crap at marketing myself in, you know, in a resume-oriented fashion. You know, I'm real, like, you know, talk to me, we'll have a genuine conversation, but like that doesn't translate to paper so easily. So I had a conversation with someone. I was just like, yeah, this is what I did. And through a conversation, you know, they were able to distill out. So like, I'm hearing you say you did this. Write that down right now. I'm hearing you say that you did this. Write that down right now. And it really became a process of me identifying, taking what I did, and then, I don't want to say finding all the keywords that are really nice to put on a resume, but putting all those really nice keywords on a resume, you know, and
Yeah.
things like implemented, customized, you know, built, refactored, you know, just like all those things that are like, oh, I see you did something. And it's really just, I wrote a line of code. Like, it's, you know, taking what I did and framing it in a much cleaner fashion than I might have been able to do myself, because I don't think of it in terms of a resume. I think of it in terms of the whole project and how I contributed to it. So have a conversation with someone and have them constantly push back on like what they're hearing. You know, find somebody in this community to talk to would be great, because you know, we all have a resume, and I can say, hey, this is how I wrote kind of the same thing on mine. You know, is that work for you? And if it sounds good for you and you feel comfortable with it, do it. It took me a while to build my current resume. It was painful. So
it is ridiculous, and I have to say, framing is everything. Bryan's obviously good at it. TK's good at it. It is not something that comes to people naturally. It is something you continue to work on, and you learn tricks by talking to other people who found those tricks, just like you were saying. It is ridiculous how much we naturally, as a developer, undersell ourselves and don't think about marketing at all, because your analytical brain cuts through that stuff. Why would you want to put clickbait in your resume? The truth is, that's sometimes those things are what converts.
Yeah. So unfortunately, I have to jump. I have another meeting at 1. But this is great. If anyone, if there's more that wants to be discussed, obviously bring it up in Slack, or we can do a second of these if we think there's enough information to fill one. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.